America's involvement in the Pacific theater began with Japan bombing Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. To understand how this came about is to look at Japan and the United States' diplomatic relationship regarding China. America is on the side of the Chinese as they were interested in access to Chinese markets. Japan was expanding their territory in the Central Pacific and were at war with China. Japan had held a grudge against America because of the treatment they received at the Treaty of Versailles and restricted American policies towards Japanese immigration. As Japan expanded to Southeast Asia, they pressured the Dutch into trade concessions and prevented Britain from allowing aid to China through Burma. In response, America placed an embargo on steel and oil imports to Japan. They also placed an oil embargo which reduced the oil availability by 88%. Japan felt they only had limited options. Emperor Hirohito did not want a war with America. He proposed two plans. Plan A is to have long-range economic talks toward economic equality, or Plan B, Japan would launch peace talks with China, America would halt sanctions, and Japan would limit their actions in China. Washington refused as they thought Japan was not serious about those options and presented a counter-proposal. Japan viewed American counter-proposal as an ultimatum. The key military factors in the Pacific theater would prove to be air and sea power. At Pearl Harbor, 350 aircraft were destroyed or damaged. All 8 battleships of the United States Pacific Fleet were sunk or badly damaged, and yet all of America's aircraft carriers and submarine bases remain unscathed. 3 days after Pearl Harbor, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States, and Congress passed another joint resolution fully involving the United States in World War II. At the beginning of the war, the Americans were outgunned by the Japanese, who had 3,000 aircraft at their disposal. By the end of the war, though, the United States had produced an astonishing 296,000 aircraft, 71,000 ships, and 85,000 tanks. America joined a coordinated force of British, Dutch, and Australians to fight the war. American intelligence also gathered Japan's secret military communications decoder, which came into play during the key battles. The battles in the Pacific were long and drawn-out affairs. Experiences in the South and Southwest Pacific established a pattern of violent warfare that represented one of the major tactical developments of the war. First, air and naval forces represented an objective and softened its defenses. Simultaneously, other forces would attack or feign toward the islands to deceive the Japanese. Whenever practical, small units occupying neighboring islands as sites for land-based artillery. Under cover of these supporting fires, the landing forces moved from ship to shore in echelons or waves. Rockets fired landing craft onto the lead, and amphibian tanks and tractors following to carry the assault troops directly onto the beaches and inland. Finally came landing craft with more infantry and with tanks, artillery, and support troops. Supplies followed rapidly as the assault forces secured and expanded the beachhead. Turning points of the war for America took place between May and December 1943 with 3 decisive battles for the Americans: the Coral Sea, Midway, and Guadalcanal. The Coral Sea battle was noteworthy in history because this was the first time 2 opposing ships never were in sight of each other during their battle. This is when the momentum shifted towards America. The Battle of Midway showed Japanese weaknesses in their overreaching strategy. They attempted to lead the Americans away from the Battle of Midway to Alaska, which also reduced their own forces. The American Navy realized a dramatic victory after sinking 4 enemy aircraft carriers, part of the naval forces steaming towards Midway. Guadalcanal was the heaviest fighting of the war. Once U.S. forces forced Japan out of Guadalcanal, this was transitioned into a forward airstrip for the V-29 to attack Japan itself. The Battle of Leyte Gulf was a death knell of Japan's naval power. In 1944, the Allies successfully invaded the Philippines. The following year saw the Battle of Leyte Gulf, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. The losses at Okinawa were staggering, with military losses over 100,000 Japanese and nearly 13,000 Americans, in addition to an equally devastating number of civilians. In light of these stunning tolls, the dreadful thought of Allied force doing battle on the Japanese soil greatly reduced the resistance to the use of the recently developed atomic bomb. In early August of 1945, America's bombers dropped atomic bombs on both Hiroshima and Nagasaki. On September 2nd, 1945, formal papers were signed which officially ended World War II.